There's Kelly. Good. Oops.
I'm saying since she's. Okay.
Make sure. So, copy it. So, can you change this now? Which one is speech? You wanna read it? Let's stick this right here. The Committee on Insurance and Financial Services shall come to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll to establish a quorum?
Chairwoman Carter,
Present.
Representatives McFall,
Present.
Coleman,
Here.
Stone,
Here.
Breen,
Present.
Rogers,
Here.
Scott,
Here.
Young, Fitzgerald,
Here.
Grant, Harris,
Here.
Markkinen,
Here.
Bazat,
Here.
Aragona,
Here.
Brook,
Present.
Nyer,
Here.
Smith.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Now we need a motion to adopt the minutes of September 14, 2003 as printed. Rep. Scott needs the motion. Hearing no objections, could you please call the roll? Oh, did I miss a part?
No, just hear no objections, the minutes are adopted.
Okay.
In
Here,
control.
okay. Hearing no objections, the minutes are adopted. First up today are votes on Senate Bill 356, 357, and 358 as introduced by Senators Hertel, Kavanaugh, Kleinfeld, respectively, for which we have heard testimony on September 14th. We need a motion to report Senate Bill 356 with recommendations. Rep. Breens moves to report. Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Representatives Carter,
Yes.
McFall,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Stone,
Yes.
Breen,
Aye.
Rogers,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Young, Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Grant, Harris,
Pass.
Markkinen,
Pass.
Bazat,
Pass.
Aragona,
Pass.
Brook,
Pass.
Nyer,
Pass.
Smith.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 8 yeas, 0 nays, 7 passes.
Senate Bill 356 is reported with recommendations. Okay. Next, we need a motion to report Senate Bill 357 with recommendations. Rep. Breen moves to report. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Carter,
Yes.
McFall,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Stone,
Yes.
Breen,
Aye.
Rogers,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Young, Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Grant, Harris,
Pass.
Markkinen,
Pass.
Bazat,
Pass.
Aragona,
Pass.
Brook,
Pass.
Nyer,
Pass.
Smith.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 8 yeas, 0 nays, 7 passes.
Thank you. Senate Bill 357 is reported with recommendation.
You want to redo it?
Okay. Okay, before everyone is an amendment offered by Representative Rogers for Senate Bill 358. Representative, would you please explain, well, she says you didn't need to explain.
You don't have to.
Okay,
That's
thank
fine.
you. Now we need a motion to adopt the amendment for Senate Bill 358. Representative Rogers moved to adopt the amendment. The amendment. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Carter,
Yes.
McFall,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Stone,
Yes.
Breen,
Aye.
Rogers,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Young, Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Markinen,
Yes.
Bazat,
Yes.
Aragona,
Yes.
Brock,
Yay.
Nyer,
Yes.
Smith. Madam Chair, you have 16 yeas, 0 nays, 0 pass.
Thank you. The amendment is adopted. And last but not least, we need a motion to report Senate Bill 358 as amendment as a new substitute with recommendations. Yes. Representative Rogers moved to report. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Carter,
Yes.
McFall,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Stone,
Yes.
Breen,
Aye.
Rogers,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Young, Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Harris,
Pass.
Markinen,
Pass.
Bazat,
Pass.
Aragona,
Pass.
Brock,
Pass.
Nyer,
Pass.
Smith.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 9 yeas, 0 nays, 7 passes.
Thank you. The amendment is adopted. The motion is adopted. Thank you. Now, leading up to discussions on potential auto no-fault reform, I have heard feedback from numerous stakeholders. To set the stage for the discussion today, I wanted to, excuse me?
We were blessing.
Okay. I thank you for the blessing, okay? That was good, everybody. To set the stage for the discussion today, I wanted feedback to outline some of the things I've been hearing. Afterwards, the Department of Insurance and Financial Services will provide a general update on this topic. In general, I have found people have liked some of the changes of 2019, such as the cost savings rates, especially in relations to other states, the reduction in the MCCA fee per driver, the option for drivers to have a choice in selecting their personal injury protection, also known as PIP coverage, unlimited PIP remaining an option for drivers, seniors being able to opt out of PIP and use their Medicare, and the consumer protections that were added. That being said, many people have concerns about the 2019 reform. Some of these concerns include the level of reimbursements for medical providers, the difficulties providers have had navigating the reimbursement process with insurers, potential disruptions in transition in care for accident victims, and certain communities being impacted with higher rates, which factors go into making those decisions. Throughout this process, my focus will be on the consumer, the cost, coverage, and access to care for accident victims. With that, I'm inviting Joseph Sullivan, Legislative Liaison Manager, and Parker Fisher, Insurance Legislative Liaison at DIFS, to come forward and present an overview of the 2019 reforms and the department's implementation efforts. Thank you both for coming forward. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you having us in today, and thank you for that overview. To set the stage for this presentation, here's the department's focus. To broadly summarize the purpose of the multiple statutes that govern our work, we monitor the financial condition of risk-bearing entities, insurance companies, banks, credit unions, etc., ensuring that they remain solvent. We work to ensure entities are in operational compliance with statutes, and we work to ensure that consumers are protected. As you know, in 2019, bipartisan auto no-fault legislation was enacted. I will give an overview of the changes to the law, some of the work that DIFS has been doing, and some of the resources that DIFS provides. Before we get into a discussion about the 2019 auto insurance reform, I wanted to provide some context about how unique Michigan's auto insurance law is. The Michigan no-fault system was adopted in 1973 to increase the level of benefits paid to injured persons, make sure such payments are made promptly, and reduce the proportion of premium dollars paid out for legal and administrative costs. Michigan is one of 12 states with a no-fault automobile insurance system. As you can see, this chart on the slide puts Michigan's PIP coverage in context with other states. Most states have a tort-based system in which the at-fault driver bears primary responsibility for compensation to auto accident victims. The at-fault driver's liability insurance coverage defends claims from an injured person and compensates them through a settlement or after litigation. In a no-fault system, the ability to sue is limited and drivers are responsible for purchasing coverage to protect themselves in the event of an injury from an auto accident. Prior to the reforms, Michigan was the only state that mandated unlimited PIP medical coverage for all drivers. Post-reform, Michigan is the only state where drivers can choose unlimited PIP benefits at all levels and has the highest benefits available in the country. The reform did allow residents to select lower PIP medical coverage levels, and in doing so, can rely on their health insurance coverage, Medicare or Medicaid, to pay for any auto accident injuries beyond their coverage limit. The new law increased consumer protections in the insurance market. So first, it eliminates certain non-driving factors. The reform prohibits auto insurance companies from using home ownership, credit score, educational level, occupation, and zip codes in setting your auto insurance rates. Sex and marital status continue to be prohibited rating factors. It requires prior approval. So auto insurance rates and policies must now be filed with and approved by DIFs prior to being offered to consumers. And it increased fines and penalties. The reform allowed for some increased fines on insurance companies, agencies, and licensed agents for certain violations of the law. It also created the Fraud Investigation Unit, which I will detail later in the presentation, but fraud drives up insurance premiums for all drivers. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the reform created a new penalty-free amnesty period, which created a period where previously uninsured drivers could re-enter the insurance market without penalty. This provision lasted until December 31st of 2021. During that period, more than 200,000 drivers took advantage of the uninsured amnesty period, including more than 83,000 drivers who had lapsed coverage for 3 or more years. So the big picture changes the reform makes to the way auto insurance works in Michigan are that it provides drivers with a choice in the level of the medical coverage. It lowers costs while maintaining still the highest unlimited benefits in the nation and increased consumer protections. Additionally, there are 3 basic mandatory parts to an insurance policy in Michigan. The first is property protection insurance, PPI, which pays up to $1 million for damages your vehicle does in Michigan to other people's property, such as buildings, fences, or other properly parked vehicles. Next is residual liability bodily injury and property damage, which is BI/PD, which pays up to the limits of your policy your defense costs and any damage you are found liable for as a result of an auto accident in which someone was killed or seriously injured. And then last, we already touched on a bit, is personal injury protection medical coverage, also called PIP, which pays for all reasonable and necessary medical expenses for your lifetime if you are hurt in an auto accident, and wage loss and replacement services for up to 3 years after the date of the accident. So Michigan drivers can now choose from 6 different PIP medical coverage limits, allowing residents to choose coverage that fits both their needs and their budgets. Drivers now have more opportunities to coordinate with their health insurance coverage, including Medicare, which can help reduce auto insurance costs. So PIP medical coverage levels are here on the slide. So you have unlimited coverage per person per accident, up to $500,000 in coverage per person per accident, up to $250,000, up to $250,000 in coverage per accident per person with exclusions, and up to $50,000 in coverage per person per accident if you are on Medicaid. And then also medical PIP out due to Medicare. So for the $50,000 in coverage option, that applies if the named insured is enrolled in Medicaid and their household members have qualifying health insurance or another Michigan policy. Medical PIP opt-out here at the bottom may be available if you have Medicare Parts A and B and all other members of your household have qualifying health insurance or another Michigan policy. So the statute is based upon offering choice for Michigan drivers at first issuance and then also upon renewal. If Michigan drivers don't make a choice, they statutorily default to receiving unlimited PIP medical coverage and will pay the premium that is associated with that option. With all that, the worst case scenario is for a driver to have no coverage or inadequate coverage for their needs. If drivers want to choose a lower limit, they still have that option though. Each insurance company is required for 8 years post-implementation to reduce statewide average PIP medical premiums. So for unlimited PIP option, they have a statewide 10% average reduction. for the 500,000 option, they have a 20% mandatory reduction, and for 250,000, a 35, and then for 50,000, 45% reduction. This only applies to the PIP medical portion of the policy, so not for portions of your policy like your collision coverage. When an individual opts out or excludes PIP coverage, it is full 100% reduction in the PIP medical portion of their policy. So here are some additional ways that the reform sought to reduce costs. So first up is one I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, is the fee schedule. So the law sets a schedule of fees that can be charged by medical providers for PIP medical. That provision took effect after July 1st of 2021, and there was a recent Supreme Court opinion that modified this, which I will detail on a later slide. There's also the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association, MCCA, their assessment. So the MCCA reimburses member companies for PIP medical costs exceeding an identified amount, which is now set at $635,000 in the event of a catastrophic event. The per vehicle fee for those considering unlimited PIP is now a maximum of $122, which was down from an all-time high of $220 per vehicle before the reform. And DIFs must now conduct an audit every 3 years of the MCCA instead of every 5 years pre-reform. Assets in the fund that are over 120% must be returned to drivers. Next, I will briefly touch on utilization review, which is another cost reduction provision. Medical care provided to auto accident victims must meet requirements for medical appropriateness. Auto insurers were statutorily required to establish utilization review programs to make those determinations, which can be appealed by healthcare providers to the DIF's utilization review section, which acts essentially as an appeals process. So our DIF's utilization review program resolves disputes between healthcare providers and insurers regarding the cost, duration, and reasonableness of care provided to an injured person as determined by outside independent medical reviewers. And all insurers writing no fault are required to submit their DIFs submit to DIFs their internal utilization review programs for our certification. I touched on this on a previous slide, but another choice Michigan drivers get to make is their level of bodily injury coverage, BI for short. This is the portion of a no-fault policy that pays up to a certain amount on behalf of policyholders if they are found legally responsible for certain damages. Prior to the reform, the minimum BI coverage level was $20,000 for a person who was hurt or killed in an accident, and $40,000 for 2 or more persons if any one accident had not been adjusted for, and this hasn't been adjusted for decades. So the reform gave drivers the ability to choose the BI limits that best suit their family needs. Drivers now have the option of purchasing coverage of $50,000 per person and $100,000 per accident or higher to protect themselves against the increased potential for lawsuits. If a driver doesn't make a choice, the new default BI minimum is $250,000 per person per accident, or $500,000 for 2 or more persons in any one accident. So prior to the reform, companies operated under what is called a file and use system. So this meant that they could file their rates with DIFs and then immediately begin using those rates even before the rate review process was complete. The reform instituted a prior approval system. So prior approval requires companies to file their rates with DIFs, and it provides DIFs with a 90-day review period. It requires that those rates must be approved by DIFs before that they can begin being used by those companies. DIF staff completes an initial review to determine whether an insurance company filing is complete within 10 days. With the reforms, for the first time, DIFs engaged outside actuarial firms, and they're engaged to help review those filings. Previously, the filings were certified by the insurance company's actuaries. So as for some stats here are the filings that our Office of Rates and Forms reviewed for 2022. For those filings, DIFs issued objections for various reasons, including pointing out areas where a filing is not in compliance with statute, or to better understand the parts of the company filing submissions or responses. Multiple objections can be issued at the same time, and for auto insurance, objections are generally issued for prohibited rating factors or missing or insufficient support for their proposed rate changes. If DIFs or the outside actuaries need additional information or find something that doesn't comply with statute, an objection would be issued and the company would be expected to provide additional information to the department. And the insurance code provides instructions for what DIFs reviews and rate filings. So the statute requires that rates cannot be excessive, inadequate, or unfairly discriminatory, and the statute provides details on what each of those 3 things means. During the review, With the goal of achieving compliance with the law and the statutory required rate reductions, DIFS issued 5,822 objections, which is an average of 9 per rate filing. And some of those filings were also rejected outright, disproved, or in some cases withdrawn by the insurer. So in approved rate filings, insurers have exceeded the required rate reductions at every PIP medical coverage choice level, and I can explain what the slide means. So the bar on the left is the mandated by statute PIP medical reduction, and then the next one, the green one, is for 2022, their average statewide rate reduction, and then for 2021 is the blue bar to the right, which is their average statewide reduction for that year. Studies have shown that Michigan's auto insurance rates have dropped, which has resulted in some savings for drivers. One study from a multi-state insurance rate comparison website noted that Michigan's rates dropped 28% from 2019 to 2023, with the state average rates falling more than $600 in 2023, which was the largest average drop in the nation during this time period. And that put Michigan down to the 4th highest rate in the nation, while remaining the only state where unlimited PIP medical coverage still remains an option. Another study from Bankrate reported in January of 2023 that Michigan is no longer the most expensive state for auto insurance, ranking that state below 4 other states. Additionally, it should be noted that insurance rates have been increasing nationally. This has been attributed to a national increase in accident frequency and severity, as well as higher costs of replacement parts due to inflation and supply chain issues. So as you may know, on July 31st of this year, there was a Supreme Court opinion issued related to auto no-fault reform. To broadly summarize that decision, 2 sections of the fee schedule, subsection 7, which is regarding payments to providers where a Medicare code does not exist, and subsection 10, attendant care reimbursement, do not apply to the cost of treatment provided to persons injured in a motor vehicle accident occurring before June 11th of 2019. A DIFS bulletin was issued in light of the Supreme Court decision and in its updated version of the previous bulletin, which we issued to give guidance to providers and insurers in light of the Court of Appeals decision. And I will detail a little bit what that bulletin did. So first up was the claims and reprocessing and timely payments language. So the bulletin reminds providers to first work with insurers on requests for reprocessing claims, and then to contact DIFS if there is a dispute over the reprocessing request. Insurers are reminded that reprocessing claims should be expedited, and that undue burdens cannot be placed on providers by requiring already submitted information to be resubmitted. The expectation is that insurers work with providers on coding issues is also reiterated in this bulletin. And insurers are reminded that DIFS will carefully scrutinize complaints in which an insurer has repeatedly rejected a provider's bills without offering assistance. As for utilization review, providers with UR cases resolved in DIFS orders issued prior to August 25th of this year may request the department review the order after first attempting to resolve the issue with the insurer. And then in regards to reasonable payments and reasonably necessary services, in cases where these sections, subsection 7 and 10 of MCL 500-3157, do not apply by statute, charges must be reasonable and services must be reasonably necessary. Now a bit about some of the other DIFS efforts. So the Michigan Insurance Fraud Task Force was officially formed by an MOU between DIFS, State Police, and the Attorney General. The goal of this task force is to promote coordination and cooperation between the 3 member agencies in the investigation and prosecution of insurance fraud in Michigan. Complaints of suspected fraud can be submitted to the Fraud Investigation Unit through our dedicated online complaint portal. The FIU staff investigates reports of suspected insurance fraud and financial fraud, some of which can be very complex and involve multiple parties. It coordinates its investigative activities with other law enforcement agencies at the local, state, and federal levels. The FIU investigates all persons, including but not limited to persons subject to the department's regulatory authority, such as insurance companies, consumers, insured, and any other person allegedly engaged in criminal and fraudulent activities. It conducts outreach efforts with local and state law enforcement and regulatory agencies to promote investigation and prosecution of criminal and fraudulent activities in the insurance and financial services market. And the FIU reviews suspected fraud complaints and investigates to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to move forward with prosecution. Insurance fraud drives up the cost of insurance for all drivers, and the FIU works to address this important issue. DIFS informed consumers and other stakeholders of the impacts of the reforms through an extensive earned media campaign, including numerous interviews and events. We created a dedicated webpage, legislator toolkits, and FAQs. DIFS continues to encourage consumers to shop around for the best savings on their rates. And the reform attracted new insurers and increased competition in the Michigan insurance market. So before the reform was enacted, Michigan was already a robust market with over 100 companies writing personal auto insurance. This led to an increased competition for Michigan consumers with the potential for increased competition and lower costs. So as of today, since the reform, 76 new companies or affiliates have received baseline authorization to enter Michigan's market. However, I must note that after companies receive this authorization to enter the market, they must still file and receive approval on rates and forms before they can begin selling any of those policies. So far, 17 have approved rates and forms, and 14 of those new offering personal auto insurance today. As mentioned, we now have prior approval. So actuaries that we contract with to review those rates, and we've issued over a dozen bulletins, enhanced our fraud unit, and we actively try to increase awareness for our processes so that people know to file complaints with the department. And we appreciate the legislature's continued support for our additional FTEs and budget cycles, which help our regulatory enforcement and education efforts. So this slide shows the total number of complaints across all our regulated industries that DIFS received for last year. Generally, something is considered a complaint when an individual formally asks the department to intervene on their behalf. Also last year, the call center, just to give you an example, answered more than 100,000 phone calls. So, auto insurance complaints. DIFS understands the importance of consumer complaints. We actively sought out complaints from all sources, established new processes to respond to them quickly and transparently reported on these. By resolving concerns through our complaint process, consumers are able to expeditiously find a resolution. We have reported and posted on our website the progress on resolving these complaints, and as of September 22nd, we have received and resolved all 129 attendant care complaints. And to be clear, resolved complaints include cases where the insurer presents a plan for appropriate care that complies with state law and the terms of the consumer's auto insurance policy. Some families may still be disappointed in the care plan if it was different from their preference or their previous care plan, but these cases are closed when medically appropriate care is in place per statute. We've recovered an estimated $11 million for providers resolving complaints from 246 different providers. And as of September 22nd, there are 18 provider billing complaints that are still currently open. DIFS continues to work with patients, providers, and insurers to expedite responses to any inquiries and complaints pertaining to access to care or billing concerns for auto accident survivors and their families, and ensures that auto insurers take responsibility for assisting policyholders with securing that appropriate care. So as a result of all of our complaints, in 2022, we helped to recover $26 million from Michigan residents. A recovery can include assisting a consumer with obtaining a premium refund from their insurance company, refunds or fees or overcharges from their bank or credit union, payment of a previously denied life insurance or homeowner's claim, and everything in between. So penalties for insurers. Throughout implementation, DIFS has been committed to ensuring that residents benefit from the cost savings under the law while ensuring continuity of care for those injured in auto accidents. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure that these concerns are resolved as quickly as possible to ensure access to care is maintained for patients. If an insured violates the insurance code, penalties can include interest payment to medical providers, increased regulatory oversight, formal administrative complaints, and fines. So administrative fines were essentially doubled with the reform at up to $1,000 to $5,000 per violation. There is penalty interest. Insurers must pay to medical providers where payments must be made within 30 days after an insured receives reasonable proof of the fact of the amount of loss sustained. State law requires 12% interest on those overdue payments. And then there's also market conduct review. So DIFS investigates their internal processes to identify what an insurer needs to change in order to get into compliance with the law. Under Michigan law, complaints filed with DIFS and any related investigations are confidential until sometime as DIFS initiates a formal enforcement action with the Michigan Office of Administrative Hearings and Rules. Where we have seen a failure to abide by the guidelines in DIFS bulletins or a pattern of delay, we have referred those cases for investigation and possible enforcement action. But we are bound by insurers' statutory right to due process, requiring DIFs to give insurers the opportunity to appeal through administrative hearings and maintain confidentiality until the administrative complaint is filed. As I mentioned, we created a new dedicated website to help educate consumers about the law. The website includes ways to inform consumers on the auto insurance changes made by the new law, tips when shopping for insurance, how to file a complaint and what that complaint process looks like, what to do if you're having issues with your insurance company, agency, or agent, and a place to report insurance fraud. We've also launched a dedicated email address for consumers, which is here on the slide, and similarly, a dedicated email address exists for agents and companies to ask questions related to the reform. And finally, DIFS has added a dedicated toll-free number that answers calls live 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So as stated, DIFS has issued over a dozen bulletins to address auto insurance issues and concerns that have arisen. First, I want to clarify what a bulletin is and is not. So bulletins are guidance issued by a department. Bulletins cannot override or conflict with state law. They clarify how we as a department will be enforcing that law. So first up is Bulletin 2023-21 INS, which detailed payments and billing guidance post the Andari decision. I detailed that on a previous slide, but that provided guidance on how we would be enforcing that decision. Next is Bulletin 2021-38 INS, which addresses the applicability of the fee schedule to certain products, services, and accommodations that are allowable expenses under PIP coverage. So essentially, exempt from that provision were services related to guardianship or conservatorship, vehicle modifications, home modifications, computer equipment and supplies, generators, non-emergency medical transport, non-prescription drugs, and over-the-counter medical supplies, as well as certain case management services. And then the last bulletin here on the slide is Bulletin 2021-36-INS, which was no-fault billing disputes. So this clarified the applicable law regarding timely payments and late penalty interest. This clarified that a provider not using an insured's preferred billing format is not in and of itself failure to provide reasonable proof of loss. So essentially they can't use the form that was provided to them by the insurance company. They're not required to. It clarifies an insurer may request the charge description master or average amount documentation from the provider, and it establishes DIF's expectations on coding reviews. And lastly, it clarified that certain patterns of conduct regarding such disputes are subject to DIF's enforcement under MCL 500.3142. So I know I touched on this at the presentation we gave in the spring, but this just details what types of assistance that DIFs can provide and also can't provide. We're happy to assist you with your constituent matters. In fact, last year, DIFs responded to over 726 inquiries from legislative offices. When you contact us, please get as many details as possible, including the constituent's name, the name of the insurer or financial entity involved, policy numbers, or any other details that you can collect. So that concludes our presentation. Here is where we're available on social media, and we're happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say, in 2019, when I came to the legislature, we had little or no background knowledge of all the things that you presented here today. It's the goal of this committee to ensure that we are provided with as much background data as possible as we address this critical and nuanced situation we're dealing with auto no fault. And with that, I'm going to open it up to the committee. This is your chance. This is the beginning. Next week, we're going to have MCCA here to continue this deep dive. So as we address auto no fault, we will have all the information we need. We're going to start with Representative Mike McFall.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for being here. Always informative. I really appreciate every time you guys come in. Two quick questions. You had mentioned that they're no longer allowed to use zip codes. Do you know what that was replaced with?
Do I know what it was replaced with?
Yeah, as to determining pricing.
It wasn't specified by any new
Okay.
addition in the language.
Okay.
So they're able to write rates on the 3 factors that I mentioned that are referenced in the insurance code.
Okay.
But yeah, zip codes was added as a rating factor that they could not utilize.
Right.
It wasn't
Okay.
replaced by anything
Okay.
in the law.
Okay. And then my other question is just because you had mentioned about the statewide reduction.
Yep.
I'm hearing anecdotally from my constituents in Detroit that theirs have not gone down and in fact have gone up. Do we have specific Detroit data?
So yeah, that's an interesting question. So the state law mandates reductions on a statewide basis for average rates. It doesn't address any specific regions of the state. There was no component of that in the law. We approve the rating methodologies that the insurers use in the state, but we don't have the granular consumer level data about how much specific drivers in specific regions are paying. So that's just data that we don't have. Others might, but we do not. I can say refusing to sell auto insurance in a region is not permitted in state law, and we do reject any filings that are sent to us in violation of the non-rating factors that were put into the state law. But really, you're entering into a conversation of kind of the pros and cons of mandating insurance rates by region. So the pros of that would be that it would lower the rates for that particular region. The con of that is the balloon argument that here, essentially that the rates for the rest of the region would potentially go up if you're mandating a rate reduction in a particular region. But no, there's no provision in state law that says, Detroit or Grand Rapids or any other community has to have an X percentage of PIP rate reduction. It was a statewide average PIP rate reduction.
I guess my question is just like the data of what they're actually paying, not that they would be required to have like a certain level or something special sold to them.
Yeah.
I was just looking for like whether or not specific regions you had data that would determine whether or not theirs was lower, because someplace else may skew it.
So the most concise way I could put it is we review the rating methodology on the front end, and we don't see the granular consumer
Okay.
level data on the back end. I think others might have that data available. We do not have that data available. We're asked
Okay.
for it frequently, and that's the response that we give.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Breen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions. I will try to parse it down a bit more. Some of them are yes or no. The penalties that are collected, the penalty interest, that goes to DIFs and not to the person who's actually harmed. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
It goes to the medical provider.
It goes to the provider.
Yes.
Okay. What about, do any of the penalties go to the claimants, the people who are actually harmed by a delay in care or a denial of care, even on a temporary basis?
I'm not aware of any of that going. I know that through the complaint process, they can appeal certain decisions if they think that their insurer isn't following the law, but I'm not aware of any penalties or interest going to them. I don't know of any of that basis now.
To be clear, if somebody has home health care provided and then the insurer cuts off that home health care or their provider folds, the person who is supposed to be receiving the care, that care is disputed, the penalty interest, does that go to the person who is supposed to be receiving the care, or does it go to the medical provider?
That's not, the way the law is written is it
Okay.
goes to the medical provider.
You indicated that there was a 28% reduction in rates overall in the state.
Right.
And do you have an idea about how many policies that affects? I personally have seen my rates go up. Everybody I know have seen their rates go up. So I'm wondering how many actual policies that has affected and not the overall reduction.
Well, it would be 7 million drivers across the state. It's a statewide average. It's as I said a bit ago, it's not a region-specific thing. It's a statewide average in PIP reduction, and that particular statistic was about insurance rates in general, not PIP.
Okay. And as far as the people who were uninsured before the 2019 reforms, how has that changed since the reforms have been enacted?
So I talked about the amnesty period a little bit, where during the amnesty period, over 200,000 drivers entered the market that were previously uninsured, and I think the number was about 80,000 or so were uninsured for a 3-year period. So they did not have insurance for 3 years, and then they entered the insurance market. And it could be more than that, but that was just the data that we had received.
Do you have any information as to how many people currently remain uninsured?
No, because they don't report, if somebody doesn't have insurance, they don't report to the department that they don't have insurance, so we wouldn't have that data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Bruck.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today and answering questions. The Catastrophic Claims Fund, that pays for PIP coverage, correct?
It pays for medical coverage that exceeds a threshold. So the threshold is now, and it increases generally, it's at $635,000. So anything pre that would be on the insurance company to pay for. Anything beyond that would be paid by the MCCA.
So and in PIP coverage, you can take unlimited coverage down to zero.
Yes, you under the reform, you now have the ability to select which PIP coverage level you want.
So with back to the Catastrophic Claims Fund, if that's paying into PIP, if I take no coverage whatsoever,
Yeah.
the Catastrophic Claims Fund would never cover me, correct?
Yeah, and you're no longer paying the fee that goes into the fund
Okay,
if you don't have unlimited PIP.
okay. Now, isn't there a fee for every driver as of, I think it was June or July, I'm sorry about the dates, where there's a $46 or $48 charge for every vehicle on the road for the Catastrophic Claims Fund?
You're talking about the recruitment fee? Yeah, that's essentially separate from the standard MCCA fee itself. Yes, that was a recruitment fee that went to all drivers, but generally the MCCA fee that you pay each year is specific to those with unlimited coverage, but the recruitment fee does apply to everyone.
Yes, even if you're getting it or not getting
Correct,
it.
because essentially that was because of the balance of the MCCA, and it's required under statute.
Why is every driver, even if they don't participate in the Catastrophic Claims Fund, paying into it then?
Well, the shortest example I could give is because that's what the statute requires.
So in the statute
Yes.
that was passed in 2019?
No,
Okay.
I think that was pre-2019, but yes, it's in statute.
Okay. And then one other question. I've had at least two constituents that are 100% disabled vets, and they are not allowed to opt out because of the way the VA covers. Are you aware of that? So they're actually complaining to me because their rates are higher, as we've heard already, than they were paying before because they cannot opt out of that coverage.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I recall there's a reason why that coverage doesn't apply. It doesn't meet all of the necessary thresholds to be considered qualified healthcare under the law. Parker, is anything additional you want to?
Yeah, I think it's set up differently. It's different than like Medicare, where it would pay your bills if you're in any sort of accident. But with the VA system, you would go to a physical VA hospital or location, and if you're in an auto accident, you can't just go directly to wherever location. So it's more of a facility rather than a payer. So it doesn't constitute the qualified health coverage requirement under the law.
Okay. I appreciate it, Chair. Thank you, sir.
You're more than welcome. And I would like to inform everyone next week we will have MCCA here so we can do an even deeper dive into the world of auto no fault. Now we have Representative Grant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just have a few questions as well. I'll start kind of following up on some of the questions about certain areas that have not seen a decrease in their rates. So I think a large part of the reason that we're all going through this heartburn is because it was focused on making sure or telling Detroiters that they would see a decrease in their rates. How do we begin collecting data that is geographically specific so that we can really target what is happening? Who should be doing that? How do we do that? Why aren't we doing that? If that was one of the large reasons why this package happened in the first place, how do we get to that? Because I feel like we have a lot of unintended consequences, but the actual intentions of this, we haven't gotten there yet.
Right. So if there was a requirement that the industry were to report that data, or if there was a study that was provided in the budget potentially, I think would be two ways just initially. I would think that would get some of that data. It's just not data that we're sent, so we don't see it, so we can't aggregate it. We review the rating methodology in the front end and not the actual impact that the individual ratepayers are paying in communities.
So if you all were sent that data, you would have the capacity to aggregate it for us and help us track it.
I mean, any additional data we would send would provide more enlightenment on any issues that you want an answer for, yes.
Wonderful. Okay, I have just another question, 2 quick questions. The court case that there was just a decision on, how does it affect people who may have experienced some of those billing delays and issues that you were speaking about, who are no longer in business because of those things? How are they made whole in any way? Are they affected, or is it just for people moving forward?
So on that, I would point to the bulletin that we issued. So there was language in there that dealt with claims reprocessing and timely payments. So essentially expectations that were imposed on the insurer and instructions on the medical providers to rebill some of those that were from auto accident victims that were pre the 2019 date.
Even if they're no longer in business?
Yeah, I don't know if I've been asked that specific of a question, but I don't know how that process would work if they're no longer in business. That kind of falls out of.
Can you follow
first
up
off,
with me?
We don't regulate the
Right.
providers at all. So
can you possibly maybe help me find an answer to
Sure.
that? I know we may have seen an increase in the insurance companies, and that's wonderful, but we've seen a drastic decrease in providers since this has taken place. So just wondering about that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
sure, thank you.
Representative Grant, those are great questions, and I would like to inform everyone that we do plan on having data provided for us from CPAN, Cure Insurance, and Hassan Badoun, specifically dealing with some of the questions that were asked today. They'll be coming up in presentations in the future. Next, we have Rep. Rogers.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation on this important topic. I want to go back to the statistic of 4th highest in the nation. Do you know what source that's from?
Yeah, so there were 2 items that I had. The one was from Insure.com, which is essentially a multi-state insurance rate comparison tool. So they had aggregated that data. And then the second one was from Bankrate, which is a consumer finance entity, a national consumer finance entity.
Okay. There was another one posted recently, I think a couple months ago, on Insurify, which is, it was posted on Business Wire, that said Michigan is the highest. So the amount they said is the average was $231 a month, and we are back to the highest in the nation. So I was just curious what source you had stated. I have a question about the rates, and the law really only requires the reduction that you had that slide up there with the bar graph.
Yep.
I think the reduction is just on the PIP portion. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, you're correct. It's just in the PIP portion.
So is it possible that despite those decreases, overall premiums could still rise because it's only on that one portion of someone's cost?
So on that, I will say, the note that I had provided that premiums have been rising nationally due to a lot of factors that I explained. But they still have to actuarially justify their rates, and we still review their rates. So they can't just increase their rates drastically without providing a justification for their rates. And I know there's been some focus on, Detroit and, maybe Grand Rapids, some other areas of the state too. And I will note that in those areas too, there is an increased risk factors. There's more traffic, there's busier highways, so some of that does correlate to some of those rates there.
Sure. Yeah, and in terms of rate setting, and it would be, in my opinion, I'm only one up here, but in my opinion, it would be great if rates were set on on driving factors instead of non-driving factors. But to Rep. McFall's point, I think that rates are still being used with census tracts. And while zip codes were prohibited, I think there's ways around that still with territory, where you live is still affecting rates. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Rogers. Rep. Scott.
Thank you. I really think, Madam Chair, that you kind of answered my question because I was wanting to know if you don't have the information, who has it, and why don't you have it, though, I guess, as far as rates in particular areas, especially in Detroit. But I will wait when we have the presentation from the other entities that you mentioned to find out. But is there a reason why you don't gather that information?
So we have information that is statutorily required to be submitted to us.
Okay.
So that is just not information that we're sent. So we do review PIP in particular because there's a statutory requirement of the rate reductions. But as far as how granular that data is, we review the rating methodologies, not the actual like individual impact to each consumer. But there are, I'm aware of studies out there and other folks that do look at that data. But if it's not being sent to us, we can't look at it and report on it. And
Can you request it, though? Can you request it?
I don't know if we have the authority to request it, or the staff time with the current FTEs that we have that are, going through the complaints and handling all the licensing and doing all this other stuff to like pull resources from other areas of the department. But I could ask.
I'd appreciate it. You can let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Scott. Rep. Breen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I am so glad that you have advised us that we have some other experts that are coming in future meetings. I think that's going to be incredibly helpful because Mr. Sullivan and his friend up here can only give us so much information. Representative Grant did ask one thing that I'm curious about, and you did tell us about the number of insurers that have come into Michigan. I am really wanting to know a little bit more about the home health care provisions, specifically how many home health care providers have gone out of business, because I've heard estimates of hundreds of home health care providers going out of business to the tune of about 40 or 50,000 jobs. And I'm wondering, do you guys have access to that information, or do you know how we might be able to specifically nail that information down?
So no, DIFS does not have access to that information. Let me explain why. Is number one, we don't regulate that industry at all. It's not under our regulatory purview. And two, there's no statutory requirement that when they go out of business that they have to report to the department that they're going out of business. So I don't know how you would track it. I just know that we can't track that information.
Have you heard something along those lines about the number of companies that have gone out of business?
I've heard stories about companies going out of business. I've not seen a number. I've also heard some stories about companies transitioning to new business practices or being added to the industry as well. So what the overall numeric impact of that is, I just can't answer because it's not data that's sent to us. There's no statutory requirement that a provider, when they go out of business, has to notify the insurance regulator. We don't have the data.
One quick follow-up, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. So if somebody were to file a complaint with DIFS and it turns out it is actually the same complaint over and over again, they don't know whether or not they're going to have a home health care provider available that day, which completely disrupts their lives. Often I know our local fire department ends up transporting home health care patients to the hospital because there's nobody there at night to care for them. So even though it might just be one day, it completely disrupts their lives. People who were formerly able to live independently can no longer if they have no idea if somebody's going to help them, especially if there's a fall risk. So if somebody's filing the same complaint regularly, when they call in, is that categorized by you folks as one claim, or is it categorized as each time they call in?
So a couple things on that too. So if somebody calls in, they get a case number, they're assigned to an analyst, but every case is on a case-by-case basis. So if it's a different issue, it's the same person, that would be two cases. If it's the same issue with the same person and it's reopened because something happened again with that same issue, their care plan was altered or whatever it may be, that case number is assigned to the same analyst. So generally they're going to be working with the same person in the department. That person is, in our Office of Consumer Services, works incredibly hard. Like, they're on first name basis with a lot of these people, and they're having conversations with them, and they're ensuring that the insurance company is following what their policy says and what the law says. So it really just depends. But if a case is assigned to a case number and it's the same exact issue, that could be one number on that sheet. But if it's two separate but sort of related issues, it could be two issues. But ultimately, I've always said if a case is opened back up, that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, because it means that we're actively working on that case to try to secure them a care plan.
Oh, and I don't dispute that at all. You guys have been very helpful with some of my constituents. It's just that what I'm seeing is a repeated pattern where folks are regularly unsure whether or not they're going to have care. They might miss a day. They might not get somebody for a week. And I'm wondering if there's a way to parse that out as to how many times home health care has been unavailable, even if it is for the same person.
So on that, I will say the way that we track complaints was the same before the reform as it was after the reform, and it largely has to deal with the software that we have, where each person calls in, they get assigned a case number. I remember as a former legislative staffer here, right, like you use your software that you're tracking your complaints that are received to your office. Each one of those will get a file, but if they call about a different issue, it might be added, and don't remember exactly how that works. But that's how our system works. And the information that we're reporting weekly, we update weekly, was because of requests from legislators for that information. And not only that, but because of some confusion about what those numbers represented, our team actually went through and took legislative feedback and provided definitions for each one of those categories represents. So what is an open case? What is a closed case? What does that mean? So I feel with the resources we have available, that is the most effective and efficient way to address concerns that are brought to our attention by getting them to the analyst that's working on those cases and not crossing wires by having different complaints numbers for different stats. And if we were to retroactively go through and review each of the cases that was sent to us and re-aggregate and change the way that our information is reported, I think that would be a substantial lift for the department, and ultimately that would pull people away from doing the things that they're doing now by trying to provide the best care that they can for the consumers that are calling in to ask for our help.
It's a conundrum. I appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Rep. Grant.
I think that we were heading in the same direction with our question. I was going to ask about is aggregated data available on, when looking at auto no fault, what are the claims that have been filed and the issues that they were getting to? So to say, like, out of 100,000 claims, this 30% was about this. And so I hear what you're saying about not having the system to necessarily track that. But once again, I'm just wondering if we're targeting where the real pain points still are in this system, in this legislation. Like, how do we drill down to really see what still needs to be addressed?
I appreciate that question, and that's exactly what our weekly reports sought to address. Like, that's the numbers that we're providing. So, for example, on the access to care, attendant care complaint reports, we've totaled that out during this time period since July 1st of 2021, 806 calls and emails. Of those, 129 are formal complaints, which are people that actually said, hey, now that you've answered my question or talked to me, I want to elevate this to a formal complaint. I officially want to ask the department to intervene on my behalf. And then as far as the provider complaints, those were 264, and 18 of those are open. So yes, we do total those and break those out as.
And those are the monthly numbers. I'm sorry.
So these numbers are updated weekly, and generally these numbers exist since the implementation date for the fee schedule. So total complaints since the date that the fee schedule went into effect.
Okay, and then can you confirm for me, because I think in the conversations I've had with stakeholders and constituents that there has been a bit of a complaint or discrepancy in how complaints are defined or measured. So like, when I speak to people from the department, sometimes what they say, what is labeled as being addressed and no longer an issue, constituents or other people wouldn't see it in that way, as if it has been fully addressed. So when you're looking at those numbers, total numbers, how are those defined? Are those people who were just emailed back, exited out of the system, could be helped, couldn't be helped? How does that play out?
So we do define those terms in our reports. So when it comes to when a complaint is opened, that is when the consumer allows us to act as an intermediary on their behalf between them and their insurer. So open complaints are complaints that are still in process, and that's when a resolution can take time, as each complaint may involve some back and forth between whatever the issue is. So When a complaint is officially closed, those include cases where the insurer has shown, specifically as we're talking to provider billing complaints, that it has reviewed claims in accordance to the provisions of state law and the terms of the consumer's auto insurance policy. So when that resolution has been made and we have a plan for them, then that's when the complaint is closed.
And on that, I'll add too, that's, we heard the same from legislators and from people reaching out to the department, and that's really why we tried to break down and define what each of these categories means. And I think some of the discrepancies you may be hearing as far as a closed case is, we reviewed that for, as Parker said, statutory compliance and compliance with the policy. Oftentimes, the family will be disappointed by that outcome because it isn't what they wanted or isn't what they expected, and it may be different from what they had pre-reform. So that case under our tracking system is considered closed because under our regulatory purview, the insurer has done everything necessary on that case.
And that has changed slightly since the decision on this court case, what you would define as?
I don't know if the definition would change. I would say that the attendant care and the reimbursement for those cases has changed. So the medical providers for someone injured in an accident pre that date would be not subject to the new fee schedule provision for non-Medicare in the auto no-fault reform. So they would be getting reimbursed at a higher rate, essentially what they were pre-reform.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Grant. Rep. McFall.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize if you answered this and I just missed it. But going back to Rep. Breen's question, I know you don't assign a new number, but do you track how off or like how many more times that it's reopened? Like, is that like a case? Because if it's something that's reopened, do you track that?
I think it could be a little subjective too. I don't know if they track it as that granular. I will say our software that we use isn't new. It's pretty old, so I don't know if that capability is in the software. I'm not in our complaint area. I don't enter the data for our complaints, but I can ask that question.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions with legislators? Well, I have one. Last time we met here, we had Fair Health, which gave us a neutral assessment of the fee schedule. The fee schedule is one of the two things that I'm hearing over and over again that's adversely impacting the auto no-fault reform. Can you please explain, is it DIF's responsibility? If not, whose responsibility was it to determine the fee schedule? And that's my first question. If it's not DIF's responsibility, whose responsibility is to determine the fee schedule?
To determine the fee schedule? Well, two things I'll say is it was in the bipartisan reform that went through in 2019, the legislature determined what the fee schedule is, and that's what we're enforcing. And then also, of course, the NDRA decision impacting how the fee schedule is to work. The retroactivity issue was addressed there. So those are the two things impacting the fee schedule now.
So the legislature in the 2019 reform determined the fee schedule.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And I think I had another one, but I think that was the most important as we continue this deep dive. And I encourage everybody to stay tuned because we will be going into MCCA and answering some of the questions about why is the rates higher in areas like Detroit, Pontiac, etc. at our next meeting. So I'm not seeing any additional questions from anyone, and I have a slew of them, but I can get you offline. So let's see. I'd like to thank you both for your presentation, okay? And if we don't have any further questions, I need a motion to excuse Representative Young. Representative Scott moves to excuse Representative Young from today's committee meeting. Hearing no objections, Representative Young is excused. Seeing no more business before this committee, we need a motion to adjourn. Representative Coleman. Motion. Well, you stood up. Motions to adjourn. Hearing no objections, we're adjourned.